All right, let's do a count off.
1, 2, 3, 4,
5, 6.
All right. Here we go. All right. I want to thank everybody for coming today. We're going to do a speech on the Alutiiq natives of Kodiak Island. We're going to be talking about changing with the time. Throughout the years, the Alutiiq natives of Kodiak Island have been through many constant changes. From their language, religion, and how they live have been altered from outside forces. Once they lived off the land and built homes from sod to be protected from nature. They did not also ask for this change, but they adapted to survive. Much of the Alutiiq culture is forgotten, but some still is practiced and was taught to them from the village elders. Kodiak Island has been a home for the Alutiiq natives for thousands of years. Their environment was very rich with resources to survive on, like fish, crab, deer meat, and wild berries. The Alutiiq tribes live on the coast of the island. They depend on these resources to live. For 12 years, my family and I lived on the island, and for 6 of these years, we lived in the village of Larson Bay. I had many talks with the elders around the island on their history and how their culture was changed. I would like to share today of 3 major episodes that made that change. Their culture was changed by outsiders, by nature, and by technology. The first change came from outsiders, from the Russians in 1741. The Russians made their first appearance on the mainland of Alaska. It was not until 1784 that Shelikoff made his way to Kodiak. Shelikoff saw the abundance of the land and how it could be harvested and shipped back to Russia and for sale to other countries for profit. The Alutiiq natives tried to fight off their change from the outsiders but failed. The Russians had modern artillery and made it impossible for the Alutiiqs to win this battle. The Russians lived, with Russia living on the island with the Alutiiq people were forced into labor. All the able-bodied men went out in groups in the oceans to kill sea otters for fur pelts. The older men, women, and children worked on the shoreline and cleaned and tanned the pelts. With the harvesting of the sea otters, the population of the Russians increased. Many of the men took native native women to be their wives. Still today, Alutiiq natives still have Russian last names. Since being married and working with the Russians, they were also forced to change their language and forced into the Russian Orthodox religion. The second change came from nature. First with the explosion of Mount Katmai, and then the earthquake of 1964. In 1912, the volcano Mount Katmai erupted. Lives were disrupted on the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. Mount Katmai exploded for 2 days, spewing 6 cubic miles of earth into the sky. This resulted in having 2 feet of ash on the ground. On the website Discover Alaska, Hildred Erskine states, "We began thinking of our fate of the people of Pompeii and of being buried alive. We were sure our time had come." From that year, nature was destroyed on the island. The salmon streams were clogged with ash. Many of the ponds were filled completely with debris. And the majority of the deer population was killed due to no vegetation for the deer to eat. The Alutiiq natives still lived off the land. And this act of nature affected the subsistence style for that year. The other change that came from nature was the earthquake and the tsunami in 1964. The earthquake was recorded on the Richter scale of 9.2, lasting for 4 minutes, with 11 aftershocks of 6.0. Now, the earthquake did little damage to the island of Kodiak, but it was the series of tsunamis. The last tsunami was the largest. The wave crested at 35 feet above low tide. This resulted in 3 native villages being destroyed. People were watching cars, trucks, and entire buildings being floated off to sea. On the Alutiiq website, Ivan Lukin quotes, "Made me understand the awesome power of our Creator seeing something like this happen. Many of the villagers moved to the town to rebuild their lives. The village of Alutiiq was rebuilt in a different location now called Port Lions. The last thing that changed the Alutiiq people was technology. Before phones were in the villages, villagers would have CB radios so they could talk to each other in their house. It wasn't until 1985 that Larson Bay got its first telephone, which was a payphone outside of the store. No other homes or buildings had a phone at this time. But time went on. The satellite dishes came. Then Dish Network replaced the satellite dishes. Villagers were able to get the internet and become connected to the outside world. I've heard many of the elders saying before all this technology that they would have community, that they would go to the community hall to play board games and cards a couple of times a week. People would go and visit around the village, especially with the older people. With the technology, they are hardly in the gatherings for fellowship, and the elders are the ones who feel this disconnection. I have shared with you 3 events that have changed the Alutiiq culture. They were changed by outsiders, by nature, and by technology. Whether if the change was for good or for the bad, the Alutiiq people have endured by teaching and practicing still their culture. Thank you. All right, we'll have a count off again.
1, 2, 3, 4,
5,
and
6.
all right, thank you.